Welcome back to CES and Women in Drones here in Las Vegas, and we have two amazing panelists with us today. And we're going to talk a little bit about AAM regulations, even though it's hard to talk just a little bit about that. So with us we have Nick Flom and we have Marilyn Pearson. I want to give you guys a chance to talk a little bit about your backgrounds because you've done so much, and I don't want to miss any important elements of what you're doing. Marilyn, if you can in any way give us a thumbnail. I don't think that's possible with your incredible experience. Tell us a little bit more about you and how you got to the industry.
As a child, I loved airplanes, and I was always looking up at the sky. So as a teenager, I had the opportunity to fly gliders, and that just really sparked my interest. So after college, I went ahead and got all of my ratings. I was fortunate to have a woman instructor, who I'm still in touch with today, as my first flight instructor in powered aircraft. So I went through all of my ratings. I taught for several thousand hours. I flew night cargo. I built time. I was a corporate and commercial pilot for a while, and then went to the FAA for a short 24 years.
Just a little bit.
I had the opportunity to bring my expertise into the FAA as a jet pilot, a airplane, rotorcraft, and I flew gliders, seaplanes, gyroplanes, tailwheel aircraft, so aerobatic airplanes. So the FAA had me doing all sorts of tasks. I worked in a field office in Connecticut, and after about 15 years, I went to headquarters as a staff specialist. And there I had the opportunity to be involved with drones in the very beginning. I had a background with RC airplanes. People probably don't think of RC airplanes anymore. They think about drones. And I got involved in drones when people said, drones, what are those? And people took a step back, and I thought it was pretty interesting. So I was involved before there was a rule, and did the exemptions for commercial operations. Those were movie industry to begin with. Got involved subsequently with the rulemaking team for what is Part 107, and was fortunate to be able to be instrumental and do the very first BVLOS, or Beyond Visual Line of Sight, for BNSF Railway using a ScanEagle. And the ScanEagle drone, interestingly, the one that was in New Mexico with us, is in the Smithsonian now. So very honored to have that first drone that was BVLOS in the Smithsonian, and to start the BVLOS enterprise. I also did the first multiple for Intel at Disney Springs, and then subsequently their multiple for the Super Bowl, which you may have seen. And now there are many, many multiple drone light shows, and did the first agricultural spraying waiver and exemption and the certification for Part 137, and was involved in the Part 135, which is the commercial operations, the package carrying that we now see. So from the very beginning, when people stepped back, I thought it was interesting. It was exciting to me, and I got involved. Now there's a cast of thousands at the FAA really working drones and making the effort to make drones part of everyday life, and not something that's unique or different, but part of aviation. I retired 2 years ago, and I've been with CAE now for 2 years and 1 day. Yeah. So now, the drones were a good segue into AAM, Advanced Air Mobility, and the EVTOLs.
Yes.
So that's where I am today.
Wow.
Still flying airplanes and seaplanes, and still have a love of airplanes, but
Right.
now very involved in a different aspect.
No one's ever going to let you retire, you know that, right? You got
Not very good at it.
No, I have too
And
much
you probably
fun.
won't. Well, thank you for that. We have a lot of questions for you. Nick, I don't know if you want to come behind that.
It's tough. It's tough.
But tell us everything that you're working on right now and how you got there.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are complementary on the other side of things. I'm a pilot by background as well, and when I go back to 15, 16 years ago, one of the areas in aviation I got heavily involved with was the skies weren't going to be blackened by drones. It was going to be very light jets, and they were going to be moving around the country in a air taxi kind of way. You foreshadow that out, and we have AM and RAM and all these same concepts. And I started a 135 company back then that was doing a lot of those concepts. Well, that was short-lived because the technology did not live up to what the expectations was at the right price point. And through that, I ended up getting involved with the UAS space. I had some friends that were software developers, pilots, and they got a contract to teach people how to take instructor-led courses for the military's MQ-1s and MQ-9s because they didn't have enough pilots to teach it. So we had to turn it into computer-based training. And that just kind of got my involvement 10 plus years ago. I ended up eventually, the state of North Dakota is where I was living. Got selected as one of, at the time, 6 test sites. That was about 9 years ago. Eventually I took over as the executive director and involved in multiple programs there, from supporting industry on getting their waivers, getting on the AAM side some of the rapid prototyping of their operations. And then also was able to lead a state, Lori mentioned, different states getting involved in this, about a $50 million investment that the state put into for infrastructure that we branded as Vantis to help enable these more advanced UAS operations. About a year ago, I went over to Deloitte to start supporting their state and local efforts. We're seeing that state and local want to be involved with this space, the way that I help North Dakota get involved with this space. How do you get local investment when you don't have the federal government giving investment? And then I've also been able to support clients with the FAA and NASA also within this role. So, and then prior, kind of during that transitionary period, I had the opportunity to be a part of the FAA's latest Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee and be a part of that as well.
Wow, I've got quite a few friends on that committee. There's so much happening in this space, and we're going to try to get this in a couple of words. We probably want to have you for a much longer session, but tell us, what is CAE doing right now in this space? I mean, clearly a lot.
Well, we're doing everything.
Yeah.
if you want me to be just brief about it. But CAE is a global company. We are in 40 countries. So we have a very large AAM team, and we're focusing on just about every aspect. From pilot training. CAE's been known for building simulators and training pilots worldwide. From pilots who are private pilots all the way through the airline pilots, and globally, not just in the US. So CAE has a very large AAM team. I'm the regulatory lead for that, which is not surprising, I'm sure,
right,
that would be my specialty. We have business enterprise, and from a perspective of our company, we are partnering with many of the new OEMs, and we're going to be training their pilots on board and eventually off board, which is going to be important. So we'll be concerned with the remote. We are also looking at the maintenance aspects, vertiports, building an MR simulator, which is a new MR-VR XR device, so that we are looking to the future of training. All aspects of AAM, CAE is very involved. I'm personally involved with rulemaking teams in Europe, EASA rulemaking for the pilot training, and doing a little bit more through CAE, coordinating other committees, and generally every aspect that you can think of. And there are many, many. This is a very disruptive and transformational time in aviation.
Are we ready? When I say that, and I hesitated, are we ready both from a regulatory perspective? I know we're getting ready, but this is a lot. I mean, we haven't had innovation in aviation that the everyday civilian gets to touch. And I don't know if forever, because most of it's space. And if you're not working for a company in that space or an engineer, you don't get to touch it. You get to see it. If you're working for Boeing or an Airbus, it's like their upgrade to the aircraft, but you're not touching that. It's military, you're not military. Are we ready, Marilyn?
Well, Lori touched
How do we get
on
ready?
some of the challenges,
Yeah.
and there are many, many challenges. We're not ready yet. We're getting there.
Yeah.
But if you think in terms of new aircraft being certified, and these are all new aircraft. They're not airplanes, they're not helicopters. We don't know what they are. They're sort of a combination. And right now I've heard there are 800 different designs that are proposed. So you can imagine it's going to be difficult. But if you think in terms of what will the pilots be, because they're not airplane pilots, they're not helicopter pilots, how will we train them? Who will they be? And then once we are working with remote pilots, how do we train those individuals? Where do they come from? Maybe they come from the drone industry, which would be a nice segue to operate these. What about the infrastructure? Do we want a vertiport on your condominium complex? You know, the public perception. We have to think about the infrastructure. Air traffic control, are they ready to integrate AAM and EVTOLs into major airports? There's a lot of traffic right now. We've had bad weather across the country and many of us were delayed in getting here, so can you imagine adding even more aircraft? So what will the maintenance people look like? And now these are electric, so what about our power grid? So I like to tell people, my colleagues, that regulations will drive the business, and they cringe a little bit, but really it's going to be the regulators that come up with the pathway, the guidance, and the policy on how to go about doing this from all aspects. And then of course we need the public to accept this. And I think that'll be, that won't take very long now. We've only been a few years into looking at drones. In the beginning, people were very worried about drones interfering with their life, and now people shrug their shoulders. And they're looking forward to package delivery. So I think it will, once we overcome the challenges, it won't be very long. Technology is moving really
And we all
at the
gotta get
speed
ready
of your
for it.
imagination.
That's right. And this is interesting. And Nick, this makes me really want to kind of dig into your thoughts on, and Marilyn hit the nail on the head. You know, private sector has not been accustomed to, you know, regulatory, I mean, to some level, obviously, if you're doing some level of research, but this is now being driven by the public. I mean, really driven by the public, not a focus group, not do they like this product, but really driven by the public and also by the regulatory system here with the FAA. Tell us about what you guys are doing at Deloitte and how you're involved in this very, you know, big initiative.
Yeah, I think that it is. It's a, you know, generally we like, you know, the public isn't, you know, developing or paying for an airport. They don't feel like that they're having that. It's kind of secondary. You have the federal government coming in to do this, and it's very well established, and you know there's a process for that. And what we're finding is the states or the local governments, they're trying to determine, do we want this? What kind of investment do we want to be putting into this? And what does this need to look like? And that's, you know, right out of the gate is, you know, why are you making an investment into this? Why do you want your community to be involved in this? And there's a multiple reasons of, you know, the drones for good kind of component. It's a quality of life area. That quality of life can look very different. You know, I think as we talked earlier, you know, quality of life is couple less trucks, you know, going through the neighborhood. That's a quality of life. Quality of life is also getting, you know, packages to, you know, more rural areas. And so there's a benefit of a quality of life. There's an upskilling of a workforce that, you know, we really didn't take that into consideration with, you know, traditional aviation. Like, is this something that we can, you know, that we want to be there to support? More opportunities, more pilot types of activities. And I think that, you know, the area that from a policy standpoint that we're also seeing is the local government has a say in this. You know, we an airport, you took off and landed from an airport. Now we're everything you can take off and land. You know, we have to rethink on how that looks within our community. Going back to the, you know, do I want it on the roof of my condominium? You know, I don't know, but I can take off right now from there unless, you know, the state and local. Now, how do we make sure that we are encouraging, you know, this innovation? We're not getting too far ahead of ourselves. I think that that's a major area that we take a look at. You know, is benchmarking. We do have people who are states that are making policies. Are they working? Are they too early? There's some that are standing back and going, we're going to watch. We're not going to let new policy, perceived policy, be the reason why we're going to what they think is going to enable safety in the future, but that might stymie innovation. So a lot of those areas need to be considered, and it's being done at an individual level. It's being done at a community level, at a state level, not at a federal level. And there's a major challenge with this that, even when I was in North Dakota, we're putting together a incredible infrastructure investment. If it was a patchwork, that it was only good for one state, that doesn't work for industry. So how do we do this at a individual state level or a local level that's not a patchwork? That we don't have a new driver's license when you go to this state, you drive on the left side of the road in this state, you need a certain permit when you go here. That doesn't work, because that will also slow down, nobody wants to do something within a state only. States end up in aviation become really artificial lines and boundaries. So how do we make sure that what is being done, that's being driven at a state and local level, has a national lens, being done? So all those are considerations that need to be taken into account.
And you're helping both the government sector as well as private sector.
Exactly.
About all this coming together. There's so many people involved in this. Marilyn, that makes me think about what's going to be first in this space. As I've looked at the industry, and I'm sure others, and as we see what's being written, the whole medical space, medical use and operations for retrieving and rescuing people who are either stuck on a mountain, on a road from an accident. The transport, obviously some of that might be UAS, also related transport is important. Medical equipment and other organic, biological organs and such. What do you think is going to be first here from an operational perspective? Who do you think is going to make the argument that we're ready and this is a priority?
Well, I think you touched on medical being critical, and who's going to be first? I think we won't see the AAM world seeing the EVTOLs landing on your rooftop first. We'll probably see them taking off and landing from more traditional airport environments or a more rural area. There will probably be the emergency medical services. EVTOLs will probably maybe supplant helicopters. They're going to be less expensive to operate. We'll see them transporting organs, medical devices, perhaps package carrying. I think we're going to see the conforming to the emergency services and the package carrying first, and probably from a more less urban and more rural or airport to airport first, before we see that in the inner city, the urban area, the challenges of building vertiports and how to land and what the environment is, the air traffic management in and out of city structures. So I think that will pave the way for the passenger carrying, and we'll see that. And Nick touched on that we need to make sure this isn't a state, but I would also say we need to ensure that this is a global enterprise as well. Yeah. So it's not just here, it's globally happening. There are lots of European companies, South American companies, even Asian Pacific companies involved in this enterprise. So it's going to be a global effort to try to get this moving forward.
Yeah, like turning a Queen Mary around in a bathtub, huh? Well, these are incredibly big hurdles.
Yes.
And from a consulting perspective, this is really a thing where you truly think global and act local. Nick, from your perspective, how do we do this? I mean, give me a whole thing about how we solve this, but for safe operations, and really making this work locally with the local business model, but also thinking about, how this works with OEMs from other countries, and how does that impact U.S. operations, and vice versa?
I think that what we're seeing from going back to, why does a state want to get involved with it? Why does a local community want to get involved with this in the first place? they're looking at this industry in a lot of ways as like this clean slate that, we now have, as you mentioned, 800 new designs. I don't know how many different entities that makes up. Each one of them, we know that, historically Boeing makes things out of Seattle, and that's kind of where they hang out. We know that Wichita, Kansas is where a lot of the general aviation. Who's going to be the next one of those? Who's going to be the next Seattle? Who's going to be the next Wichita? We have an opportunity now to be the manufacturing hub. We have new hubs, that haven't been considered before, and those early adopters have those types of opportunities in order to do that. And you start to do that again, not necessarily that you're looking to. Seattle isn't looking to do this only to support Washington State. They're looking at it from a global standpoint. Can I do all of worldwide manufacturing, at a local level? And we know that manufacturing is changing. This is one of the areas that Deloitte's involved with. We have what's called a smart factory in Wichita, Kansas. We're talking about how do you take historically what is airplane production numbers and turning with production certificates, but doing it at an automotive production level where we're having much higher volume. There's new ways of manufacturing that needs to be done. How can a local community help with some of those different types of support so that they can push it out at a global level? And that's just the manufacturing side. I think as Ryan talked, like training. Training is a whole new component. We've seen our CAEs, we've seen our flight safeties. They've set up all these shops across the country. What does that now look like? Do we need to have that again for different types of pilot training? Do we need maintenance? Has generally been done at a lot of the 2-year tech colleges have been able to provide that at a regional level. There's not enough. We have pilot shortages. We don't talk about the real need of the mechanic shortage that's happening. Oh, and then let's bring in thousands of new aircraft that are going to have to meet these same requirements. Like, each one of these local communities need to play those different types of part in order to enable this. So these are clean slate types of operations. You can start to look at what was done previously in our traditional aviation, and you can now plant your flag in your community if this is an area that looks like it could be of value for you.
I want to stay on that for 1 second, because this is something we don't talk about enough. And that is the business model that we often refer to as a business model for the operator. What does that look like? And that's clearly a challenge in and of itself that we're still trying to figure out. But this other business model is around the OEM and this entire supply chain. And you bring up some incredible points about manufacturing. I'm building my own drone, and one of the things that we're looking at is, one, how do we get all the parts? Because a lot of components aren't made here.
Right.
And we want to also meet the federal government. I think it's 90-10, 80-20 or something that has to be made here. And so we're looking for manufacturing here, and the labor costs associated with that. What does that mean? What keeps you up at night when you think about this part of the puzzle?
Yeah, to me, the big challenge is going back into we're trying to produce at volumes that we have not seen in aviation before. If I go back to the very light jet thing, Eclipse was going to be producing 2,000 aircraft a year in order to make their business model work. They didn't last. There was a lot of different types of technologies that they were trying to put into their production in order to meet that production certificate, which is actually very challenging in order to comply with. But the parts component and the traceability of all those types of things at a volume that we have not seen before within aviation, that to me is a huge challenge that I think about. Because these we're not getting into this space because we're trying to enable 10 operations. Package delivery doesn't work if I have one drone in a community doing package delivery. The scale of this is what makes this all work. And on the production side, how am I going to scale production to meet these types of requirements? That's a challenge that I think about a lot.
There are a lot of jobs to be had, not just in terms of operational directly within the industry, but it's all these other things that will feed into it. Marilyn, on the training side, do you think we're going to have a shortage over the next 10 years of people to pull from?
Well, I think we have a
Speaking
shortage.
of supply chain?
I think we have a shortage now.
Right.
If
They're going to
you-
be competing for more just traditional commercial.
Oh, I think so.
aviation.
You know, I look back to many years ago, which I won't tell you how many, when I
Two.
just a few short years ago when I got all my ratings, and how expensive it was,
Yeah.
and how many jobs I had at night so that I could fly during the day. I did all my training civilian. I didn't have you know, a military background. So I think in terms of the cost, and if you think now about the drone operations, when you get a Part 107, it's not so expensive. So it might be enticing. We're going to need to look at new areas to draw from. And even within my company that I work for, CAE, we're thinking in terms of, are they going to be the college graduates that we need to fly these aircraft? Or could we look at the trade schools? Or could we look at, and this is just Marilyn speaking, could we look at maybe teachers who are on summer vacation? Might they want to fly an EVTOL? Or how about those New York City taxi drivers? If they could figure out how to navigate through the city streets, maybe they'd be interested in flying an EVTOL. Perhaps the training would be less expensive. There might be an opportunity there, especially as we look toward remote operations. Because now you're not thinking, I need to get a private pilot certificate, a commercial pilot certificate, an ATP. It might be something totally different that doesn't encompass quite so many hours, so much training, so much expense. I think there will be a shortage. I think we need to think about that years ahead of time, and not once the aircraft are certified.
Yeah.
And I'll put a shameless plug in for an organization. I'm co-chair of SAE International, which is a standards body, and this is G35 modeling, simulation, and training for emerging aviation technologies. And we have 3 subcommittees working on using modeling and simulation to certify the aircraft, these new aircraft. Performance-based standards for the VRMR training devices, the FSTDs, how to qualify those, and pilot training and qualification. A whole subcommittee looking at what will the standards be. Will they be traditional? Are we hours-based, performance-based? Will we look at how ICAO looks at CBTA, competency-based training and assessment? So it's new. Everything is really a blank page. We're not really depending on how we used to do it. We're trying to lean on some of the regulations so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But really everything is new if you think about the certification of the aircraft, the pilots, the mechanics, the training devices, the landing sites, the batteries. We're not looking at a traditional engine. It's a battery operated. It's not just a shortage of pilots, it's really a challenge of everything as we're going forward. And I think even now we need to look to even grade schools to get children enticed into this, into the STEM areas, into robotics, and to tell them this isn't something that's going to be new. It's going to be the everyday once they're older. So it's going to be exciting. I can't wait.
This is fun though. I mean, this is figuring out something new. I mean, this is what we're all, in it for, and innovation. And it's going to take us a minute. I have 1 minute left. One last question. We've talked a lot about this as it relates to people, flying autonomous operations. When do you think we're going to be ready for that? Do you think people are going to be ready? Do you think the industry's going to be ready to fly autonomously in the next 10, 15 years?
That's a great question. I had the opportunity to have dinner with my boss in Montreal, and his son's turning 18, and I said to him, would you fly without a pilot? And he said, if my father said it was certified and okay, yeah, sure, no problem. And I think someone my age, a little bit older than that 18-year-old, might balk at not having a pilot. But honestly, I think as the industry matures, I don't think it'll be a problem. And I think we will see autonomous operations. If you look at how many pilots will be needed per aircraft, 3 or 4 pilots per aircraft, and maybe 3 seats for passengers, it's not economically feasible. The return on investment won't be there. So I think there are a lot of companies that are intending to be autonomous right away, and right away doesn't mean tomorrow or
Right.
next year, but they will operate without a pilot, with a remote operation. I don't think it's so different than what we see drones doing now.
Absolutely.
I think the technology is there. We need to think about how do we accept it.
Nick, that's going to be a whole new space for you guys to tackle.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Really want to thank Marilyn and Nick for joining us to talk about
Thank you.
AAM.
Yeah.
We are live at CES in Las Vegas with Women in Drones. We'll be right back.